Now, we've been studying the doctrine of the Holy Trinity as it has been revealed to us in the Old and New Testament Scriptures. Most recently, we've been going through the books of Moses. Last week, we began to talk about the book of Numbers. Today, we'll continue our discussion in the book of Numbers. Now, in the New Testament Scriptures, it is made clear that all three persons of the Holy Trinity were present and active in the Exodus out of Egypt and during the complaining of the people of God in the wilderness. And we talked about that last time, both in Jude and Paul's epistle to the Corinthians, first epistle, chapter 10. We see this in the letter to the Hebrews. But in fact, the book of Numbers recounts the presence of God among his people during these trials and tribulations, so that even though the people are unfaithful, the Lord remained faithful to his promises, including his presence in the midst of his people. So we look at the book of Numbers, specifically at chapter 12. We hear about the grumbling of Aaron and Miriam. And so Moses writes this, starting at verse 5. And the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam. And they both came forward. And he said, Hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a vision. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth clearly, not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? The anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. That's Numbers chapter 12, verses 5 through 9. Again, the Lord's presence was made known in the pillar of cloud when he came down to Aaron and Miriam. Now in Numbers chapter 14, we hear these words of Moses after one such episode again of a rebellion and the impending judgment. So Numbers chapter 14, verse 13 through 14, it says this. But Moses said to the Lord, Then the Egyptians will hear of it, for you brought up this people in your might from among them, and they will tell the inhabitants of this land. They have heard that you, O Lord, are in the midst of this people. For you, O Lord, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands over them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Again, Numbers chapter 14, verses 13 through 14. The Lord declared to Moses in Exodus chapter 33, that you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live. That was back in Exodus 33, verses 20 through 21. Thus the Lord makes his presence known to the people in a way in which they can see and live. The physical presence of the invisible divine essence was made known in the pillar of cloud at the tabernacle, even in the midst of this unfaithful people. Again, in chapter 16, the Lord's presence is in the midst of a complaining people. It's made known. We hear these words starting at verse 41. But on the next day all the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, You have killed the people of the Lord. And when the congregation had assembled against Moses and against Aaron, they turned toward the tent of meeting. And behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Get away from the midst of this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. And they fell on their faces. That's Numbers chapter 16, verses 41 through 45. Again, we see this presence of God made known in a visible form, in the pillar of cloud. In the book of Numbers, we learn that the invisible divine essence is made visible to the people of God at the tabernacle. He is promised to be in the midst of his people. His unseen presence is made manifest above the Ark of the Covenant, in the pillar of cloud, and of course with the angel of the Lord. The evangelist John writes in the Gospel of John chapter 1, For the law was given through Moses, Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known. That's John chapter 1, verses 17 through 18. The second person of the Holy Trinity has always been the one who makes the unseen God seen. He is the glory of the Lord. In chapter 7 of Numbers, we are told about the manifestation of the presence of God before Moses. The glory of God dwells above the cherubim on the ark. So verse 89 states this, "And when Moses went into the tent of meeting to speak to the Lord, he heard the voice speaking to him from above the mercy seat that was on the ark of the testimony, from between the two cherubim, and it spoke to him." That's Numbers chapter 7, verse 89. Likewise, in chapter 10 of Numbers, we hear these words, starting at verse 33. "So they set out from the mount of the Lord 3 days' journey, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them 3 days' journey, to seek out a resting place for them. And the cloud of the Lord was over them by day whenever they set out from the camp. And whenever the ark set out, Moses said, 'Arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you.'" And so this right here, again, it tells us that where the ark is located, the invisible essence of God is made visible at this place, where the ark resides, where the cloud is present. The Lord promised to be present with his people in chapter 20. Moses reiterates the divine presence of God in the angel of God, for he is the one who brought them out of Egypt and appeared to Moses in the bush. In chapter 20, verse 16, Moses says, "And when we cried to the Lord, he heard our voice and sent an angel and brought us out of Egypt. Here we are in Kadesh, a city on the edge of the territory, of your territory." That's Numbers chapter 20, verse 16. You see, the Lord had promised his visible presence among his people back in the book of Exodus. In chapter 13 of Exodus, we are told this, starting at verse 21. "And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night." That's Exodus chapter 13, verse 21. In the next chapter, Moses writes, "Then the angel of God, who was going before the host of Israel, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of God moved from before them and stood behind them, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And there was the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night long." This is Exodus chapter 14, verses 19 through 20. Furthermore, the Lord declares to Moses in chapter 25 of the book of Exodus about the construction of the ark, saying this, "And you shall put the mercy seat on the top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony that I shall give you. There I will meet with you, and from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubim that are on the ark of the testimony, I will speak with you about all that I will give you in commandment for the people of Israel." That's Exodus chapter 25, verses 21 through 22. The Lord gave these words of instruction to Moses, saying, "Tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat is on the ark, that he may not die. For I will appear in the cloud over the mercy seat." There is a peculiar passage found in Exodus chapter 33. The Lord says this, "I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people." That's Exodus chapter 33, verses 2 through 3. Although the Lord had promised the Israelites that he would be in their midst, he then says that he can't be in their midst or he would consume them. The Lord had declared to Moses, remember, saying this, "You cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." That's also in Exodus chapter 33, verses 20 through 21. You see, unholiness cannot remain in the presence of the holy God. The Lord is holy, and he thus makes his people holy. The Lord makes his presence known to his people in a way in which they can see and live. As we have discussed before, we learn from passages like this to make a distinction in persons between the one who sends and the sent one. The Father is unseen. He sends the Son to make the invisible God known. Again, the evangelist John writes in chapter 1, "For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. The only God who is at the Father's side, he has made him known." That's John chapter 1, verses 17 through 18. The Son is the one who makes the Father known. In the 5 books of Moses, the visible presence of the invisible God points to the Holy Incarnation, in which the second person of the Holy Trinity takes upon real flesh and blood to reveal the divine essence to all creation. In fact, the evangelist John also writes in chapter 1, verse 14, "The Word became flesh and tabernacled," that is, dwelt among us, "and we have seen his glory, the glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." Now, back in the book of Numbers, chapter 11, we are taught to make a distinction between the 3 persons of the Holy Trinity. Now, starting at verse 16, we hear these words. "Then the Lord said to Moses, Gather for me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and officers over them, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and let them take their stand there with you. And I will come down and talk with you there. And I will take some of the Spirit that is on you and put it on them. And they shall bear the burden of the people with you, so that you may not bear it yourself alone." That's Numbers chapter 11, verses 16 through 17. You see, the invisible God promises that he will come down, making his presence known to the people. So continuing at verse 24, we hear these words. "So Moses went out and told all the people the words of the Lord. And he gathered 70 men of the elders of the people and placed them around the tent. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him, and took some of the Spirit that was on him and put it on the 70 elders. And as soon as the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied. But they did not continue doing it." That's Numbers chapter 11, verses 24 through 25.